Hi everyone, I thought it'd be fun to do some journal tags and some envelope making today. So I have some tags from my Antique Alice kit here, and this is the envelope we're going to be making. So I'm going to set that aside for now. So what I did for the journal tags is I printed it on cream cardstock, which is one of the tricks I use so that it doesn't have a stark white flip side, and it's easier to make it look vintage if we start out with off-white paper. So I'm just going to quickly cut these out, and we'll do some distressing and stamping and see what we come up with. One of the things I personally never get tired of doing is inking the edges of papers and embellishments. So I'm going to do that with some archival ink. I'm going to set those aside, and I'm going to use a trick that I learned on Deli Girl 1961's channel, which is to adhere scrapbook paper to the back of a sheet or anything printed that has a white background. And I'm just going to find some paper here. So I'm just going to go through and see what I've got here. This paper stack is called Memorandum, and I really like it. As you can see, it has a lot of vintage distressed, like collage elements. This is one of my favorites of his, although I have to admit it's hard to pick a favorite. I think I'm going to do this one. So I'll just So I'll be sure to make a note of it here as I'm editing the video, but when you're cutting curves, a good trick is to move the paper and not the scissors. So I'm holding my scissors steady, and I'm just rolling the paper around and closing the scissors slowly. And if you do end up cutting a straight line, a good trick is to just open the mouth of the scissors, line it up carefully to your straight line. So I'm going to do it right here where there's a tiny bit of white, and you just basically chop. So the scissors will stay in a straight line, if that makes sense. It's hard to explain, but it's helped me a lot, and as far as cutting straight lines. you just line up the scissors to your edge, and then you just close them, keeping your hand steady and straight and pointed like this, pointed forward, and you'll get a much straighter cut. So I'm going to do it here where there's a tiny bit of white. So I'm lining it up, opening up the mouth of the scissors, opening up again, and as long as you keep your hand steady, you can get a fairly, that's still a little bit wonky, but pretty straight line. Okay, so for this part I like to use Elmer's Craft Bond glue. It's a nice big glue stick and it's permanent, which to me just means it's strong. It's a strong glue, and since it's dry you don't have to worry about paper warping, which is nice. And I'm going to make sure to be really generous with the glue and go all the way to the edges. And I printed the envelope on just a plain piece of copy paper since I knew it would be adhered to a thicker cardstock material so that it doesn't get too bulky and the folding doesn't get out of whack. So I'm just going all the way to the edges. And I've just learned through practice that you really do have to be generous with the glue, or else it will start to come away from whatever you glued to it over time and use. It'll start definitely becoming unglued. See a little spot right there. Okay, now I'm gonna make sure that I get some of this really nice antique looking paper in here, looking at the flip side. So I'm just gonna line that up as best I can. I don't know about you guys, but when it comes to gluing down paper, I almost always get it wrinkled somehow. So I really try to, especially with this glue, because once you stick it down, it's pretty well stuck. And then I'm just using a brayer. You could use a bone folder, of course, or just your hands to smooth it out. I really like the brayer because it rolls right on there, and you can apply some really nice firm pressure, and you can get any like little creases and bubbles out. And then I can see along this edge it's a little bit, needs a little bit more right there. Yeah, that's a tiny more right there. And I just make sure to get all of the edges, because whoever's gonna own your wonderful journal, you don't want it coming apart on them. Always hanging on to the scraps. What do you guys do with your scraps? Do you have a special basket for them? Do you organize them in any way, I would love to know what you do and how you do it with your scraps, because I'm looking for a way to organize mine in a way that makes some kind of sense, so that they're not just, it's not a huge just pile. Okay. Just being really careful to not overcut these corners. Okay. Scrap over there, paper bits in the trash, and now we have a nice two-sided envelope. Isn't that cool? I'm gonna get this side too because I can see the white hanging over this side. Okay, I think I'll do a different color ink this time for the edging. I'm using a little bit of peeled paint, Distress Oxide. My kitty cat is curling up behind me on the chair here and stretching out and letting me know that it's time for me to remove myself from the chair. I should have known that already. And I'll just do that around here.
What you doing?
Then you can also just go back around any areas you see that you want a little bit more ink. But see how nice that scrapbook paper, because it's already got that really nice aged look. It's so simple. Okay, so we are ready. So I'm gonna grab my bone folder. And I'm just going to go ahead and score. And I can hear that paper cracking a little bit away from each other with the glue, but it should hold, and if it does come loose at all, we can always go back in and re-glue some areas. But it should hold pretty well. I've had good luck with the craft bond. Okay. And I actually have a scoring board, and I have not taken it out of its packaging or used it yet. I'm a little bit intimidated by it, so it's sitting, I can see it from where I'm sitting, and I should be using it. Okay, so last fold will be this flap. That's pretty straight. Okay, so that makes a pretty cute little envelope. That looks pretty cute. And then you flip it over, it's got this side, and then if they peek inside, you've got your nice inky edges and a really cute pattern inside. I love that. So now I'm showing you on a stamping platform how to stamp on the backs of your tags. So I started out putting a cling stamp of a teacup, and now I'm just going to show you how you can get a really cool flip side of design tags and make it into a journaling spot as well. In the previous video I showed you about the baby oil technique to make faux vellum, and the scrapbook paper that I used in that video didn't quite work out the way that I had seen a tutorial work out. So I went back and watched that tutorial, and now I'm going to show you a little bit more what I had in mind. So here's some regular baby oil. I'm just going to pour a little bit into its lid, and I'm just going to use a plain flat kind of wide paintbrush, and I'm just going to go over some of these light areas of this printed sheet. So you can use your inkjet prints as well as your laser prints for this technique. It just needs to be light in color. Like in this area where her face, especially this really dark area, it would not work because the darkness is not going to be able to show anything through. So I'm just going to paint these areas where I want something from behind to show through. And you want to be fairly generous with the baby oil. You don't have to glop it on, but you'll be able to see where it's sinking into the paper. And you just want to make sure that all of those areas are getting saturated. And this is a somewhat messy process. I would definitely recommend having baby wipes on hand and some type of rubbing alcohol so that all of your stuff doesn't get oily. And I am gonna, just to make it match in tone, I'm going to go over her face and everything, but again, this is not an area that I'm going to have anything in the background. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take a paper towel. I'm going to take a paper towel and just smooth it over the paper. I'm going to wipe up the area underneath it so I'm not getting more of the oil back into the paper. And then I'm going to do the same thing to the back of the paper. This will just get the excess oil off of the surface. I can still see some shiny areas that I'm just going to blot. Okay, and to show you how this is going to work, I'm going to take this black and white mushroom and see how you can see through the paper. So what you would want to do for your journal sheet, this would be folded in half for your journal. So this is the area we're going to be working with. And I'm going to take one of my coffee stained papers. So here's a journal sheet that's been coffee stained, and I've spritzed some spray inks on it and a little bit of stamping at the bottom. So this is the area I'm going to be working with where this paper is going to go over it. So I'm going to grab some stamps sheet here. And let's say you want this stamp to go right in the middle and then one in the corner. I'm going to take some embossing ink. You could use any pigment ink here, like a distress ink, distress oxide. There are lots of inks that you can use as long as they are not the fast drying kind. So chalk ink is going to be the first one to dry. So most dye inks and pigment inks will stay wet a little bit longer. And I'm just going to position that right there. And make sure that's good and stamped in. Then I'm going to take a sheet of paper to go underneath where I'm going to be embossing. So I can pick up the embossing powder. And then I'm just using some black embossing powder. And let that slide off onto your scrap paper. And just fold up that paper. And slide your embossing ink back into the jar. And then, just so I don't knock it over or my kitty doesn't knock it over, I'm going to make sure to put that jar lid back on. And then I will take my heat tool. Now this is a matte embossing ink, so it's not going to be glossy or sparkly. It's distress powder, so it's made to look, what they call it is weather worn. And another trick you can use with embossing is to go under the paper like this with your tool and heat that side as well, and that will help the embossing powder to activate. You just don't want to stay on one area too long. So there's our embossed image. You can see it has a nice rough texture. And now I'll show you how when you set this paper down, you're going to see something underneath it. And instead of the corner stamp, I'm just going to use this damask one, and I'm going to put it so that it goes off the paper a little bit. And for this, I'll just use some of my sepia colored ink. Line that up. And I would normally use my Tim Holtz stamp platform for this, but I realize not everyone has that tool, so I'm just showing you how you can do this without a stamping platform. And now you can see how you get a little bit of extra background on this sheet just from doing this baby oil technique. Really cool. So for this one, I decided to emboss it, and the embossing powder I'm using is copper. You definitely don't have to emboss. I just think it adds a nice touch. And if you want to stamp with embossing, it's best to use either embossing ink or an ink that stays dry a little longer than like your StazOn inks and mementos and the ones that are meant to be waterproof. So a lot of times if I don't use embossing ink, I will use distress ink, distress oxide. Any of the pigment inks will work fine, and then the embossing powder will cover up the stamp ink, so it doesn't really matter what color stamp ink you use. So I found this stamp in part of a set that is from Prima, and it looked like journaling lines to me. So I thought I would create a journaling spot. I think the stamp itself is supposed to look like old wood, but it has these lines in it and it looks distressed. So I wanted to try it out for something that someone could write on. And I used a little bit of distress stain to ink up the stamp. And this is in the color Aged Mahogany. Just really love those deep burgundy colors. And then I just go ahead and stamp it again so that there will be extra writing space. And if you don't have a stamp platform, of course acrylic stamping blocks always work. But I definitely recommend the stamping platform. Several different companies make them, and it makes stamping so much easier, especially if you're not a great stamper like me, where you're constantly getting stamps like where the whole image doesn't come through. You can line it up like you see, and you can stamp it as many times as you want. So if part of the image doesn't quite come through, you can always just stamp it again, and it's really easy for lining it up because of the grid. It's super helpful. This one I got at Hobby Lobby, and I used a 40% off coupon, and I believe it came to something like $22. So, I mean, you could spend that easily just in acrylic blocks. So it's definitely been a really worthwhile crafting tool for me. And I believe We Are Memory Keepers makes one. There's also the original stamping platform, which is the Misty. And there's at least one other company that makes these, but the Tim Holtz one is the one that is most common, at least in the Arizona, like Phoenix area. It was the easiest one to find. But they're also on Amazon, so if you're interested in one of these and getting a good price on it, I would just go online and do some price checking, and you should be able to find one between $25 to $30. So now I'm just going to go ahead and ink up that same wood stamp that looks like journaling lines, and stamping the same tag that I embossed. And this way, the journal tag not only has the front design, but then when it gets flipped over, it will also show, a design, and it'll be useful as well as a journal spot. And then I thought, because the stamp ink was already wet, I would try a little bit of Distress Oxide and just see what happened, because the oxide reacts with water in this really cool way. And it basically just made the stamp come out green, but once it dried, it did show a little bit of that water reactivity, which was a really cool effect. And then I just splattered it with a little bit of water to see what would happen, and I believe I use a heat tool here to speed up the drying. Just want to be careful with the water use, because any of the inkjet printing that you do will definitely react to the water, so you don't want to mess up your inkjet. Here in Phoenix, we have a couple of stores that actually sell used magazines, so you might have some in your area. So Somerset Studio is there. They have quite a few of these, and they usually have a theme. It's a monthly magazine, so this one is Halloween, and you can go through, you can see I've already been taking stuff out of this one, and find images you like and cut them out, and then you can turn them into tuck spots, you can turn them into tags, they can be little images that you incorporate into a page. And a lot of these in Somerset Studio and similar magazines have mixed media work that people have done, and they've been featured in the magazine. So like here, hopefully there's not too much glare off of that page, you see this whole neat little wooden box that has all these little goodies in it. You could cut out like the hand, you could do this little book right here, and you can start to see like even the drawer could be cut out and used in mixed media, because someone has already designed this. And so this art is already created, and you kind of don't, I mean, you can kind of take out the design aspect of it for yourself, in terms of like, this could be cut out right here, this collage, and turned into an envelope, and all you'd really have to do is cut it out and glue, you know? So anytime you run across magazines like this, I mean, you can buy them brand new too. They are quite expensive to buy them brand new, but you can get a lot of use out of just one magazine. It's also a really good place to get inspiration for covers. I mean, this right here looks like it could make a wonderful cover for a journal. For this last part, I wanted to show you how I turned one of the little cutouts from the magazine into a journaling embellishment. So I cut out this raven kind of mixed media design from the magazine, and now I'm just going to go ahead and use my big glue stick to stick it onto some scrapbook paper that has kind of a Halloween inspired design. And I just go ahead and make sure that that's nicely smoothed out and adhered to the scrapbook paper, using a bone folder to get any little wrinkles out. And because the little embellishment had like this, a lot of straight edges on it because it's a frame, but it also had some curves in it, I just went ahead and used my scissors instead of my paper trimmer. And I left about a 1/2 inch on the top there because I'm going to use this edger punch to create an additional design. And if you remember in the last video of the series, I showed you all about corner punches and edging punches and how to best use those. And I'll be going more in depth about punches and junk journals in a future video. So anyways, you guys, thanks so much for joining me for this video. I hope you found it helpful, and as always, I would love it if you would leave comments or email me with any questions you might have that you would like me to address in a future video. Take care, and I will see you next week.